Hi, I'm Sunny Dean,
And I'm Scott Drakeford.
and this is the Publishing Radio podcast. In 2022, we both launched debut novels in the same genre with the same publisher in the same year. But despite having very similar starts, our books and subsequently each of our careers went in very different directions.
That pattern repeats itself throughout the industry over and over. Why do some books succeed while others seem to be dead on arrival?
In this podcast, we aim to answer these questions and many more, along with how to build and maintain an author career.
Everyone signing a contract deserves to know what they're really signing up for. In an industry that loves its secrets, we'll be sharing real details from real people. We'll cover the gamut of life as a Big Five published author, from agents to publishing contracts, finances, and more.
Welcome to the Publishing Radio podcast, where every week we find new ways to make Scott Drakeford cry. And this week we have with us Nick Binge, the author of Ascension. And I first encountered Nick when I saw Harper shilling copies of his book, his ARC advanced reader copies, on Twitter. And the description intrigued me a lot, so much that I posted and asked very nicely if they would like to have one of my firstborn children in exchange for an ARC. At that point, Vicky Leach, who's Nick's editor and also my UK editor, commented and said there's no need for firstborn children, just like some of their blood or something would be sufficient. Anyway, I got the Arc of Ascension and read it and was really, really happy to give an endorsement for it. But we're going to talk to Nick today about all the fun things involving film rights and foreign translations and big sales and stuff like that, because you might think it won't happen to you, but it could do, and it does happen to someone. And also, to be honest, there's so little information about that side of publishing. Like when I was looking into it, there, as scant as information was, there's still more information about what it's like to be midlist than what it is like to navigate film deals and translation rights and all that jazz. So yeah, feel free to introduce yourself, Nick, even more than we already have.
Hi, I'm Nick. I just go on record and say I still never got any of that blood, Sunyi. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that at some point. And yeah, I think Sunyi's basically covered everything. I'm author of Ascension, which I've been really fortunate and really lucky that certainly in the publishing terms has seen a lot of success in a lot of different areas. But it's I think it's easy to see. And I think you talked about this a bit before in the podcast, but it's easy to see these kind of successes from an external perspective and think that people have just like immediately hit big, and people don't really talk about the years that go in beforehand, or kind of the pitfalls and the other things that are going on. So yeah, I was writing for years before any of this happened, but it has happened. I'm a big fan of the podcast and keen to just kind of shine a light a little bit on kind of some of the nitty gritty, some of the contractual stuff that's involved as well with film rights, some of the kind of terms and conditions and what they mean. Because when I was going through it, I was like literally every time I got sent something, I was having to contact my agent or someone to be like, I don't know what any of these words mean. I don't know what these terms mean. I don't know what back end means. I don't know what purchase price means. I know nothing. And it would have been useful, I think, going in to have a little bit more of that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Wait, you wrote some books before Ascension, is that right? Just to give some context for it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can do a very, very quick kind of
Yeah, go for it.
what happened. I mean, I started writing a while back, and I wrote a couple of novels that died on query after, the classic query trenches of submitting to like 100 different agents and all of them saying some variation of, it's not, right for the market, or, I didn't fall in love with it or something like that. And just kind of plugged along and keep writing. I mean, I look back at the first novel I wrote, which I was really proud of at the time. And now I'm like, yeah, it was terrible. I know why no agents picked that up. Like it's a really, really derivative nonsense. I kept writing, and it felt like I was getting better, which was good. And so after a couple of books that died in the query trenches, I wrote a book called Professor Everywhere, which is it was allowing myself to, I suppose, be a little bit more experimental, a little bit more niche and weird and kind of playing around with stuff, and ended up, because I was kind of frustrated with the whole querying process, submitting that to a prize. It was like a Southeast Asian literary prize thing for unpublished work. and they really liked it. They shortlisted it, and then they said that they wanted to publish it. And I was like, yeah, this is it. I'm going to be a published author. And I was, but they were a very, very small press. And I think looking back on it now, there's not a huge amount of difference between what they did and what I could have effectively done self-pub if I had a bit more information and I knew that guy, except for the fact that like they made me sign over all my rights, which I didn't really understand or know anything about at the time. But that's, that's part of the game. So yeah, that was fine. And I was excited to have a book, and then I wrote Ascension, and that's obviously where things hit it big. And I think the moment that I knew that I had something on my hands here was when I came back. Like, as I said, I've been in the query trenches before. I knew how it went. I'd spent months and years waiting for rejections from people, the occasional full going out, but so I wasn't super hopeful. But I moved back to the UK. I lived in Hong Kong at the time, and I moved back to the UK and started querying Ascension. And to cut a long story short, in a month, I had 7 offers from agents. And I was like, okay, this is different. This is not the experience I went through last time. That was a bit crazy. One of the reasons I went with the agent that I went with at the time, and I think this is something to think about for those of you who are kind of out there in those trenches and looking for agents, and anyone that has to make various decisions, is not just because the agent was great, but because they were part of a big and very well established and very well connected agency, which I think has genuinely made a very, very large difference to certain things that have happened down the line. So they had their own quite large translation rights team, and this is C&W, who are my agency in London, but they're a big agency in their own right, and they've got loads of huge authors, and they're fantastic, but they're also owned by Curtis Brown, who are huge. So they've got all those connections there. And then they were also owned at the time by just umbrellas of organizations underneath one another. They were owned by Original Talent Group, who were then bought later on by UTA. So technically they're owned by UTA now. And what that means is that, yes, I have my agent, and yes, I have the resources at C&W, but I also have the resources of Curtis Brown, and I also, when necessary, have the resources of UTA, which obviously makes a fundamental difference. It meant that I had a dedicated translation rights team as part of the agency who are working for me. It meant that Curtis Brown has dedicated book to film agents, like their entire job is taking these books and pitching them to film people and stuff like that. And it meant that they had connections with kind of people all over the world. And I think being at a smaller agency, I think the book still would have done well, because obviously there was something marketable about it that people liked, but I don't know if it would have done as well without having those kind of those connections. And so I think that's something to be really aware of in agencies, and the way that they kind of interrelate and play with one another. And if you are going with an agent, thinking about the kind of those that I didn't realize beforehand, the idea that agencies are sometimes owned by larger agencies that are also owned by larger agencies, and they all have those kind of integral connections between them in the publishing industry. So yeah, that was that. And then Ascension went on sub about 7 or 8 months later. We did a couple of edit passes with my agent. We were kind of ready to go. We went on sub in the UK first. My agent was thinking we were going to go sub in the UK first, hopefully build some buzz, and then go sub on the US, because he was very adamant that we were going to split rights, and he was only going to offer UK and Commonwealth rights to UK publishers, which we did. That went to auction eventually between 5 publishers in the UK, and I can talk about how auctions work in a little bit as well. So it ended up going to auction in the UK. It ended up selling to 8 countries in translation. So 8 foreign deals of various countries in translation at different times during that period. And actually, I don't know if I can talk about it too much, but I literally just got an offer from a 9th today.
Congratulations.
So that was exciting.
Did you talk to him about
Yes.
strategy before going out, or did he just kind of say this is how it's going to be, or do you know strategy then?
He told me what his strategy
Okay.
was, and I went, okay, because I really didn't know very much about the industry at the time. So I didn't really feel like I was in a position where I could argue with him or wanted to argue with him. I trusted him.
Okay.
So yeah. Sorry, go on to it.
Was that, those strategy sessions or whatever you want to call it, was that part of your selection process with those 7 agents that you had offered to you? How did you navigate that?
I definitely did ask in kind of relatively vague terms, I suppose, about strategy. I asked, the things like who are you planning on submitting it to, and why, and different agents told me different things. But one of the things that did sway me to Alex was he told me when he was talking to me on the call about the various resources that CNW had, the book to film agents, the translation right team, all of that kind of stuff, and how we would lean onto that to find. Yeah, I remember him specifically mentioning at the time the way that it's part of his strategy and C&W strategy to find diverse income streams for authors that aren't just the book deal, and that you find your income streams in various ways, and that was attractive to me, obviously. And he was the only one that really actively talked about that and kind of pitched that to me, and that's very much what he's managed to do for me, or we've done together since. So yeah, that was great. And then while it was all happening, and this was the bit that was, I mean, it was all surreal at the time, right? I'd gone from like nothing to like this 5 publisher auction and these translation rights, and was kind of losing my mind a little bit.
When it happens, it happens.
And I remember, yeah, it's when it happens quickly. That's definitely true. And I think I remember really clearly. I was in bed. It was like 9 or 10 p.m. I was like reading a book, ready to go to sleep, and I get a text from Alex that just says, "Remind me the age of your protagonist again." And I was like, weird text to get at 10 p.m. Like, read the book, Alex. But I texted him back, and just around mid-40s or whatever, and he was like, okay. And I remember it really specifically. People are asking because they're thinking about who might play him in a movie, and I was just like, what do you mean people? Who are these people? Like, are you chatting about the office? Like, are you like, what's going on here? So I kind of didn't sleep that night, basically. Yeah. And then a couple of days later, basically, their book to film agent Luke at Curtis Brown at the time had been getting a lot of interest, and an offer came in from a big production company that I'm not actually allowed to go into the exact details quite yet of the names and everything like that, but it was great. It was fantastic, and he said there was a lot of excitement about it. And part of that is there is very much as I call it on the Discord group when we talk about it, there is very much a phenomenon in the publishing and entertainment world called the hype train. Yes. And when that hype train starts going, it really starts going and it picks up steam. And what I discovered was there were so many individuals within the industry, particularly book scouts and film scouts, whose entire job is to get tickets for the hype train. Like that's their job. That's what they do. They put their ear to the ground and they listen for when the big books are getting talked about.
Hype builds hype.
So when, for example, hype builds hype. When, for example, a book's going to a 5 publisher auction or something like that, and then they take that and they run to another publisher or another or a production company or something like that and be like, here's this book, you need to get in on this, and the more that builds up, and so that's kind of part of what was happening at the time, and it's why it all kind of snowballed, I think, to some degree. So yeah, and we ended up with 2 offers from 2 different production companies that we had to decide between. So there was kind of auction scenario there, auction scenario in the UK. We had an auction in France, I think, as well, and then we sold the rights to Riverhead in the US about a month later. And that was an interesting strategy, because his idea was we pitch it early, we build buzz so that when we go to the US, people already know about it and they're excited about it, and that worked kind of perfectly, it seems.
It's a weird one.
I don't think...
I was just going to say that's a weird one. My only experience that's the other way around, because my agency is American, so the fact that I'm here, we pitched the States first, and then the UK was kind of like the afterthought, which was a bit weird to me, because for a book set in the UK, that was my target market. But I was going to ask as well, if you feel able to answer. If not, we'll cut the question. But I was going to ask as well whether the percentages are the same when you do it that way around, because typically if you sell the deal in the States, the UK side is like 12 to 15% of the original American deal. I don't know if that scales the other way if you sell UK side first, because is the US a bigger market for you still, basically?
The US is still a larger market, and it doesn't. I remember you talking about, and I'm happy to talk about my deal sizes and stuff like that. That's fine. I remember you talking about the difference between your UK and your US deal. My US deal was larger, but not to the nowhere near to the same scale. And I think the difference was my UK deal went to auction and my US deal did not. So there was nothing to specifically push up the US deal in the same way. So my UK deal ended up being £25,000 for one book, standalone book. But then my US was I say only, but like in terms of kind of percentages and things like that, the US was $40,000 for the book as well. So it was higher, but not, you know, 10 times higher. And I think the auction scenario played into that. I think I would have got a lower UK deal if that hadn't been the case. I don't know. It's complicated, I guess. But we didn't have the leverage to kind of push the US deal up.
You've done really well out of it with all of this so far. So
I mean, yeah. No, I mean, by no means was I disappointed. I was absolutely thrilled. It was amazing. So yeah, that was happening, and so the auction in the UK. People don't know how your auctions work. There's a variety of different ways that they can work, and I think that runs slightly different in the UK to how they are in the US. US, there's usually a little bit more of a kind of blind bid scenario going on. They try and kind of play publishers up against each other and try and get the highest deal possible. The UK does a similar kind of thing, but I think they tend to be a little bit more transparent. So my auction was done in a couple of rounds where basically Alex said, okay, everybody table a bid, right? And they all did. And then Alex then said told all the publishers, okay, this is what the highest bid is. Yeah. Right? And this is the money that's currently the highest. Now we're going to do a second round. Can everybody table a second bid? And what I found really interesting actually was some people tabled a second bid that was actually quite a bit lower than what the highest bid was the first time round. And I think that's maybe because they didn't have, they didn't have the approval to offer more money, or they just wasn't there for them, but they still wanted to bid anyway, because it's not always about the money, right? And, there are a variety of other things. And actually what swung it for me with Harper Voyager, even though they did at the same time end up being the highest bid, what swung it for me really was the marketing plan and marketing deck that they sent.
Same. It's so good.
They are very good at it.
They are so good at marketing. Like every time I discuss Harper Voyager with friends on the UK side, it's like I really think they are so smart and savvy. It was just between Titan, who couldn't compete, and between Harper. But it's same as yours. Titan was like, we're going to offer this amount of money that we know is below the Harper one, but they were trying anyway because they might as well.
No, the same thing happened. We had an offer from Titan, and they offered again, and Rebellion as well offered, but it wasn't as high as the Big Five could do. And then we had Hachette. It was Wildfire, so it was Headline imprint that were kind of competing with Harper. Really interesting thing. Actually, really pissed Alex off by pulling out of the auction in the second round. So bid quite a high offer, and then the second round they turned around and they were like, actually, we're rescinding our offer because we've decided that, I don't know, we don't have enough in-house support and we don't want it anymore, even though they actually gave an offer the first time, which was odd.
Take it personally, that's my suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. We've printed out the editor who made the offer and throw darts at her face on the wall. Keeps me. Anyway, that's how the auction went. We made the decision. I mean, we had a couple of calls with the two kind of top competing editors to chat to them as well about vision and stuff like that. And then we made the call to go with Harper Voyager. And then interestingly, with the film stuff, in terms of auction, as it were, it wasn't really an auction in the same that industry is far more opaque, if any industry can be, than the publishing industry. As I've discovered, the kind of the Hollywood film industry is even more so. And basically it's like the Wild West out there and people do whatever they want. So my book to film agent I believe all he said to the production companies that were bidding were, you're in a competitive environment. He didn't say how many other people were bidding. He didn't say what their bids were. He was just like, be aware, you're in a competitive environment. Just to like push them up, which, I mean, worked in the end. So that happened, and that was great. And then when the film details came through, that was when I learned, I think, a whole bunch of new terminology that might be interesting to anyone who ends up getting an option or offered an option or has interest from somebody. I think.
Oh, can I start at a basic first and say, just sorry for people who are listening.
Yeah.
And I'll clarify this to you. So when it comes time to talking film sales, you're selling not the rights to the film, but just the option. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and what the option, it's essentially
Yeah.
kind of like a deposit to some degree, where they pay you a certain amount of money for the rights to make that film for a certain period of time. So usually 18 months, sometimes 24, sometimes 12, but 18 months is common, where they'll pay you a certain amount of money, and in that 18 months they have that time to make the film. At the end of that 18 months, usually if they haven't made it, they have two options. Either they say, actually, we're not making this, we've decided against it, in which case all the rights come back to you, and you can shop it again if you want to, or sell it to somebody else if anybody else is interested. Or they can re up that option fee, so they pay the option fee again for a further 18 months. They're like, well, we still want to make this, but it's
Yeah.
going to take us a little bit more time. We're gonna pay you another option, and so that's the initial kind of amount. And then when the film or TV show actually gets made, they then pay you the full amount, which is called the purchase
Okay.
price for the rights, which is usually significantly higher. But what's interesting is anybody can buy an
Yeah.
option to a film, right? So often it's production companies, but sometimes it's individuals. So it might be an individual screenwriter who is like, oh my God, I love this. I want to try and adapt it and try and sell it myself to a studio. It might be a director who's passionate about it. It might sometimes it's even actors. That happens sometimes when they get really excited about books. But often it's production
Did
companies. One thing
Oh, sorry, I
I
was going to ask a
sorry, go
question,
on.
which is, did your either your film agent or Alex ever talk to you about whether any of those particular groups made a film more likely? Because an option is usually the point at which most books stay and the film doesn't ever appear, which is fine, it's free money.
Yeah.
But I just wondered if any of them ever said, like, whether a production team buying those rights versus, say, a random screenwriter made it more or less likely for it to ever actually happen.
I think a production company is going to make it more likely because they've got a whole team working behind them, right? And so they'll have more experience doing that than an individual. I suppose that depends who the individual is. You know what I mean? If like I don't know, Leonardo DiCaprio decides that he wants to buy the option to your film, there's probably more likely than like a random screenwriter in LA.
That's all
But
you
yeah,
need,
so a
Scott.
production
It's
company. But
Leonardo.
then what a
To
I'll go
get Leo
find
on the
him.
phone.
Yep.
So a production company are kind of the people who, let's say they buy the option, they're going to start to put together people like the director, the screenwriter. They might start to do some casting and things like that. And then what they do is they then take this package and they bring it to a distribution studio. And so the studios are the people that provide the money. They're where the real budget for the film comes from. So when you see films that have budgets of like 50 million or stuff like that, that's studio money, not production company money. They take it to studios and hopefully get the studios to go, yeah, this looks great. We're going to fund this and we're going to distribute it and we're going to get it in cinemas and we're going to do all
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff that gets done. And studios are then split into kind of that. So there are some very small studios, and then there are what are called the major studios. So the majors are there's it's kind of like the big five of publishing. There's the five major studios. It's Universal, Paramount, Disney, Warner Brothers, and Columbia, which is also Sony. Those are the five kind of majors. Though I think that these days as well, the really big streaming services are being considered majors as well. So Netflix, Apple TV, Amazon, stuff like that, they're being considered major studios too. And then you get what are called the mini majors, which are things like Lionsgate, A24, stuff like that, like slightly larger, slightly smaller studios that still have clout but don't have maybe quite the same budget as like Disney does or like Paramount does. And what's interesting, the reason this was important contractually is, and if you're kind of in that position where you're looking at doing an option deal with a production company, is there's various ways that money can come to you through that contract. The first is obviously the option. The other obvious one is the purchase price. But sometimes, and if it isn't in there, and if you're in a position where you're negotiating this, you might want to talk to your agent about getting it in there, is what's called a studio setup fee. So it's basically when the production company goes to the studio and it's called setting it up. Basically, the studio agrees to fund them. You can get in your contract a little clause that says that you get a payout because the studio has just funded them a ton of money, right? So with a major, you might get an extra payout for a major or a slightly smaller payout for a mini major, but it's contractually written in that so even if the film doesn't get made, just the act of setting it up with a studio is another way for you to earn money, and then they have to pay
So
you.
Can I ask real quick? Are all of these that you're mentioning? So you've mentioned the purchase price and now potentially a studio setup fee. Are those all stipulated in the option that's bought, or are those all?
Yes, yeah, they're so when you get the option contract, there's very, very clear language about when money comes to you and all of that sort of thing, all the way to the film getting made and beyond, right? So the other thing that's usually in the contract is what's called back end, which is basically a percentage of the profits from the film. So it's usually about 2.5% or 2% of profits from the film if the film gets made. What I was told, and I believe from talking to other people that this rings mainly
Yeah.
true, is that you will never see this money, and don't count on it, because even if the film gets made
Yeah.
and even if it does extremely well, because Hollywood and film and TV producers in general have, their accountants are very, very, very good at making it so that films don't make a profit. They just
Yeah.
won't make, like, for classically, for example, Star Wars never made a profit,
Yeah.
even though it did hugely, wonderfully well.
I mean, is there any potential there? Probably not from the standpoint of somebody signing an option on a book, but I have read that people who maybe have a little more leverage have gone after gross percentages rather than net for that very reason, so that they're not subject to funny accounting methods.
That there is probably some scope to make those kind of things. I think, as with all contracts, there's probably scope for just about everything, right? If you have the leverage to argue it. But I would suspect that many production companies would just say no to you to that. But, like, worth asking, always worth asking. The worst people can say is no.
I've got two questions I can throw your way if that's all right.
Yeah.
One is I wondered if Alex ever discussed shopping agreements with you, and if so, you could, I don't know, maybe explain that to listeners. If not, don't worry about it. And I guess the other question is whether there's a way for authors to look at the production companies that have offered options and evaluate them, because obviously some of them are going to be like, the film equivalent of a micropress, which might be okay, but definitely not asking out of any kind of personal interest.
I think the first question I don't know the answer to, because I'm not sure I know what a shopping agreement is, or maybe I have it under a different term. What are you thinking?
Oh, just a friend of mine recently accepted one, and I think it was something along the lines of essentially they get less money for their option, so that the I think that was when a particular person, like a director, was interested
Right.
in the film option, and so the idea is they offer less money so they can then go out and possibly have a better chance of like spending that budget towards acquiring a team essentially.
Okay.
There were ups and downs to it, but yeah.
I would be. We didn't discuss that because fortunately we weren't in that
Yeah.
position. That The sound of that immediately set off, like, alarm bells in my head. Like, that felt like red flags to me.
It
Um,
it would too, although in this case, I will say that that
Yeah.
director, right? It was a friend of ours that had a basically the person who directed approached her
right.
personally,
Cool. Nope.
so and so, but
Oh
that
yeah,
they were
yeah, yeah.
basically offering like a regular option or a shopping agreement, and they talked it through, and it would just be easier to ask someone who's gone through a shopping agreement maybe, because it doesn't
Yeah.
apply to you at all.
Yeah, it's not something I went through. So yeah,
No, don't worry. There's so many options.
there's so many different types. That's the thing. It's so complex.
Yeah.
For the second, though, I think it is difficult. I think you just have to try and look at what they've done. Look on IMDb, look at what they've
Yeah.
made, look at kind of who's been involved, see if they've done any adaptations in the past. I was fortunate enough that the production company that we went with is very
Yeah, it does.
established, like, to the point
Okay.
where, like, you go on their IMDb and you recognize all of their films.
Yeah.
So that I never had any questions there. I was like, oh my God, these are important people.
I'm making a
But
list of all these.
I think, yeah, in the same way with small presses, just Google as extensively as possible.
Yeah. I recognize some of the films they've made, but they are not in the genre that is my book.
Yeah,
So
but
I was just looking at that like,
that's the interesting thing about production companies sometimes, is they're not
okay,
really, they don't work like publishers in the way that they have like a niche or a genre, because when they kind of sell them to studios, they can sell them around to other people. You know
okay.
what I mean? I think it'd be. Yeah. It'd be more
Okay.
akin to an agent that's got representing various genres than like a publisher, if that makes sense.
No, that's really helpful, actually. Thank you.
And I think so. Production companies do a wide variety of things. So, for example, I mean, I'm going to ask you to cut this, but
That's fine.
because I'm not allowed to, and they're gonna tell me off for it if I do. But for example, so my option is with
Okay.
who have done everything from
Okay.
just such a random array of like things that are definitely all not in one genre by any means, and it's just like
So they're definitely
that's what they do.
casting Jack Black for Ascension, right?
Oh my
Unquestionably,
god.
yeah, yeah, in
That
every role.
in your
They're doing the
contract.
Eddie Murphy coming to America thing with Jack Black, and he's going to take every single character.
Yeah.
Too bad we have to cut this, huh?
We can probably leave in the Jack Black line. It'll just be a bit weird. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Zero context. Just throw it out there anyway. That's
Just
funny.
just
I
throwing
mean,
Jack Black.
bearing in mind I wrote a lesbian vampire novel, I went and looked up this company and they made. And I was like, okay. But anyway,
That's okay. That's big. That's established.
yeah. Well, I'll know more in a couple of weeks because I talked to them the day before your launch party. So we'll see.
Okay, cool, exciting. Um, so yeah, I was thinking of other things I was going to say about the kind of contractually stuff. Other things are important to know, I suppose, with options are that usually the first option payment is on account, which means that it is taken away, it's taken from the purchase price. So when you get the final purchase price, it will be minus the first option payment. But then usually,
Okay.
and if it's not, you should make sure that it is, succeeding option payments are not on account.
Okay.
So if they go to the end of the first option period and they have to pay your next option payment, that will not be taken off the purchase price. That's an additional option payment that they need to pay you, and that's relatively standard, I think.
Did anyone ever discuss with you like a TV show versus film and whether that was a possibility or was film was the thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had two offers, and one was for a TV show and one was for a film. Those were two
Okay.
very specific pitches.
Oh, fascinating.
And yeah, that was something that I thought about,
Is it
and
true they pay you for every
ultimately
episode if it's a show?
they do. Yeah, yeah, they
Okay.
do. They do, but that's complicated as well. So if it's film, they'll give you a purchase price, and then they'll pay you for every episode, but that will also be on account. So let's say, for example, your purchase price is 100,000, and they're going to pay you 10,000 for every episode, but they're making 10 episodes. Well, that's your 100,000
Yeah.
because it's all on account. It's taken off the purchase
Okay.
price,
Right.
so it's not actually additional. If they went on to make a second season for some reason and made more episodes, then they might have to then pay you more. But usually it's just kind of built into the purchase price. And the purchase price you get, because it's complicated, and it's why it's good to have kind of more money baked in at different points, like the studio setup fees, because as everyone will tell you, films and TV adaptations can die at any
Yep.
point. Like any point. Even when you think like this is it, like we've got a cast, we've got a script, we've got like people will turn around and be like, nope, it's not happening, it's dead, and that's obviously more often than
Yeah, I
not.
had a friend whose show was filmed and died before it hit screen because
Yeah,
of COVID. Yeah.
that's rough, but important to know that the purchase price, the full purchase price, is paid to the author on the first day of principal filming. So it doesn't actually need to hit screens. The first day that they are on set with a camera, with an actor in front of the camera, that's the day that you get the purchase price. I think it has something to do with insurance. I think technically the film is insured from that day onwards. So if it does collapse at that point, the studio gets their money back if because of COVID or whatever. So it doesn't really matter to them financially. So that presumably that person would still have got the purchase price for that
Hopefully.
for that for that production, even if the production didn't get made, which sucks in of itself.
What were your decisions like when you were looking between film and TV, if that's okay to ask?
Yeah, I mean there was obvious narrative decisions about kind of what what I thought the medium would work best in. There were financial decisions as well, and part of the reason that we swung to film is that they offered me more money, which is a big reason. And the film production company were significantly more big and well established, I think, and it was felt that they probably had more gravitas and likelihood to be able to push this thing through if they were really behind it. Because actually, when it comes to kind of like creative and narrative decisions, I'm very much not a purist. I've had a lot of people
Me
ask me,
too.
like, what do you feel about people adapting? And I'm like, they can do whatever they want with it. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, I'm putting my faith in them because I think they're such fundamentally different mediums.
Yeah.
I think some of the best adaptations I've ever seen are absolutely nothing like the book, and some of the worst adaptations I've ever seen are trying to be too faithful to the book.
Blade Runner.
Yeah, Blade Runner is a perfect
Hmm.
example, right? Annihilation is another wonderful example. It's almost nothing like the plot of the book, but it still manages to capture the same vibes. Things like that. So yeah. I was very like, you have a vision, you run with it, you do what you want with it.
And it doesn't
So
change the
that was never
book, but it does boost your sales, so people will discover your book in other ways.
exactly, exactly, yeah.
I mean, and is there anything contractual related to that, or is that just kind of off the record conversations you're having with those bidders
Um,
in terms of faithfulness to the book?
Nothing contractual. I think there was obviously discussions had about like both teams were like, we really want you on board. This is an interesting thing actually. Both teams were very much when they were trying to
Mm.
get the option. Were like, we really want you on board creatively. We want you to be part of the discussions. We really want your vision, all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. That's really cool. But obviously, nothing was written into the contract. It was kind of a gentleman's agreement, as it were. And that's like none of that has happened.
I will comment on that actually because so if an IP is established, it is a little different, and also the things I've heard from some other agents and people that if the IP is specifically YA or middle grade, so for example, Twilight, the films were very true to the books, and they had to do that because that fan base is expecting a true adaptation, and if it isn't a true adaptation, they're going to go tell all their teenage friends, "Oh, the Twilight films suck," and then they won't go see it. So I think it does depend on the IP. Whereas an adult, it's like I guess no one cares, so we just get whatever Hollywood gives.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Adults
Exactly.
don't read anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Um, so yeah, I think contractually, as far as my adaptation was concerned, I think the case for certainly a lot of adult stuff is they can do pretty much whatever they want to it.
Yeah.
And if they want to, I mean, if they want to turn around to me and say, we're not telling you anything, shut up, go away, they are contractually allowed to do that as long as they pay me the money. And they've been good and they answer my questions and they talk to me and stuff. And I'm not precious and I'm not like trying to have more of a creative say. But I think if I was someone that really wanted to have a major creative say over it, I think I would be probably quite frustrated by the process.
Did anyone ever have a conversation where they talked about like basically what option offers look like in terms of size, or do they just range massively the way publishing does? I don't know if that's a fair question to ask.
Um, they range
Okay.
hugely the way
Yeah.
publishing does it. It's almost exactly the same as a book deal. And there's very little scope of information out
Mm.
there about what it is. So they can be tiny. They can be like literally like here's $500, and they can be really really small, and that's quite common. And they can be like you read about like $1 million option payments and stuff like
Mm.
that, which are ludicrous, right? And anywhere in between.
Okay.
And I didn't really have a sense
Hmm.
um, when I was going in actually, and I didn't. It's true, I didn't really have a conversation with any of my agents about is this high, is this low, like comparatively to other option payments. I did actually find out um, later on for various other reasons when we were getting into stuff contractually that what ended up being negotiated for me was the highest option payment that that particular production company had ever paid an author.
Oh, wow.
Congratulations.
which
Yeah.
like that's amazing. I had no metric to kind of at the time to compare that against. I was just excited about big numbers, piece of paper,
Do you
which was
think,
great.
like publishing, the size of option payment has any bearing on basically their attitude towards producing it and putting work in?
Yeah, I think it
Okay.
definitely does. I think it definitely does because ultimately that's money that they paid
Mm.
like in advance. That's money that they paid that they're not getting back, right? And if the film doesn't get made, that's money that they've thrown down the drain. And to a production company, $500 or a grand or something like that might not mean very much, and so that's fine. But if they're paying you, five figures, six
Mm.
figures for something, then that's a lot of money that they've invested into something that might not get made.
Mm.
And so I think that's definitely true that there's more investment if they put more money into it in the first place.
Yeah. And I guess there was one other thing I was going to sort of ask before we take up too much of your time. There's a lot of discussion, which I always think is bogus, about how authors need platform, need platform, need platform. And I was thinking about this recently when I think I was like a while back, I reshared one of your tweets. I was thinking, this guy does not have much of a Twitter platform, and actually, most of us don't. And I just wondered, if anyone ever even mentioned it, because you hear all these horror stories on Twitter, people saying, "Oh, an agent and publisher rejected me because of my platform," and I'm sorry to say, the really cynical part of me doubts that every time it happens. Like, unless they're writing nonfiction, I feel like none of these production companies are googling him, going, "Oh my God, he's not got 10,000 followers on Twitter. Let's withdraw our option."
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I don't think anyone in fiction is getting rejected because of the size of their
Yeah.
platform. I think what people could get
Well, for
confused
adult
by
anyway.
is some people for adult anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. Some people are getting picked up because of
Yeah.
the size of their
Mm.
platform.
Absolutely.
So some people, if they've got like, you know, a million followers on TikTok and they've written a book, that might move the needle in terms of them getting picked up. But nobody who's written a good book is going to have someone look at them and go, "Oh, you haven't got a Twitter account, like we can't possibly." Because I don't have any kind of platform. I kind of hate using social media.
Same.
I've kind of forced myself to like Twitter, but all I really do is just tweet marketing stuff about my book and occasionally retweet other people, and that's about it. It's a very quick story time,
Go for
but
it.
I think it's very relevant. I had a run in with this a few years previously where I bought the same bogus that was being sold about like you need a platform, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a platform, and I started this blog, and I was really diligent with it, and it was like writing advice and stuff about writing, and it was really good, right? It was like people were reading it, people were subscribing. I was having like there was a point where I was having like thousands of readers, like tens of thousands, like people visiting the site. Oh, yeah, which was amazing, right? And I was like, this is it. This is I'm building a platform. It's going to be so great when my book comes out, because this is when Professor Everywhere was going to come out with my like
Mm.
small press, and I was like, when my book comes out, I'm just going to share it on the platform, and all these thousands of people are going to come on, and they're all going to buy it, and I'm going to be a bestseller and blah blah blah. And I did one post about the book where I was like, oh, by the way, like, thanks for hanging around on this blog. Just to let you know, I've got a book coming out next month. Like, if you're interested, here's a link. And the only thing that happened was a bunch of people unsubscribed. That was it.
Wow.
That was the only thing that took place. Is a bunch of people like, oh, he's trying to sell me something, not interested anymore. Bye. And I put so much work into it. I was so disillusioned. It didn't move my sales an inch. Yeah, I was so utterly disillusioned that after that point, I was like, I have no time for a platform, and I've never really tried to make one since. And clearly, in terms of the publishing stuff, it hasn't made a difference at all.
I don't think it makes a
Yeah,
difference. I think the people who make a difference are outliers, and it is a viable path. But for me, the work involved in becoming a social media celebrity is just fucking harder than like writing 6 books, and I'd rather write 6 books
yeah,
and have the backlog. So your mileage may
Yeah.
vary. If you're really good at TikTok, you go for it. I fucking hate TikTok. I'm never getting back on that site from checking my jiu-jitsu instructor's videos when he tells me to. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that in there because that's always one. It's like I think I felt in a way like you were a really good example of a book that was very buzzy and hypey, but not on Twitter. Like you are not very visible on Twitter, and that's not like a criticism.
No, yeah, I'm not.
It's just that Twitter is not the real world. Twitter is this tiny pocket of people who kind of are like living in their own separate cave system from the rest of society. She says on Twitter all the time. It doesn't reflect what's going on with the people who have money, with the people who are selling books, not for trade publishing anyway, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. So yeah, don't stress about a platform if you don't have a platform. Use the time to stress about writing a good book.
Yes, on that note, if you feel up to, I guess, plugging yourself, where we can find you, where we can hear about you, because you, at the time we're recording, your book is 2 weeks from release, and we're hoping to release this that week or soon after, if that's okay. Though to
Cool.
be fair,
Yeah,
we've never
no,
gotten we don't really get sales from doing the podcast. So I'm not sure any of our authors do, but all for what it's worth.
It's worth a shot, yeah.
Yeah, always worth a shot.
it's always worth a shot. Always worth trying to plug.
Leonardo DiCaprio might be listening.
He might be listening. Okay, so I'm going to address this. I'm going to address this directly to Leo, if you're out there. Leo, my book's coming out at the end of April, and it's great. It's about a big mountain, and everyone goes crazy, and people die.
And you're the right age for it.
You are the right age for it, Leo. You are the right age. This could make your career, is what I'm saying, because I think you need the exposure. So. So keep that in mind, Leo. And if you would like to find me, I am where am I? I'm on Twitter nominally, occasionally at binge writing and nicholasbinge.com. I have a website, and that's about it as far as platform goes. But there's kind of links to stuff there if anyone wants to check it out.
Yo, no worries. Thanks so much, man. Scott. Do you have anything else? I think we've overshadowed you this episode.
No, not at all. I've just been sitting here taking notes. I have a full page.
I will be taking notes actually towards. Well, I might be borrowing your notes when I go through doing edits.
There you go. No, yeah. I mean, this was fantastic, right? Like the percentage of writers who get a book deal is fairly small, and the percentage of people with a book deal who then go on to get even just an option, right, is quite small. So getting a little crash course on what that looks like, terms to look out for. I don't know if it's helpful, because who knows if I or many of us will ever be in that situation, but it is at the very least quite interesting.
I think quite a lot of people, a surprising number, do get options. I feel like I know a lot of people who just sit on them, and okay, they sit on them for years, and there's probably not a chance that the book's getting made, and sometimes that people are buying those options to prevent from books rights getting taken, but it's free money that you get. And I guess the other side of it is, for every person I know that has an actual film option, there's probably 2 or 3 that have been offered a scammy one. So I think having some awareness of what is normal is really the best defense against getting taken for a ride.
And I think as well that in the same way that even the very, very established publishers do, as we all know well, if they can try and screw you in some way in your contract, they will, That's not because they're evil. Well, maybe it's because they're evil, but it's because they're capitalist, and it's because that's how the companies work, right? And so it's important to be aware, little things about kind of options being on account and purchase prices and stuff like that, and how they all work, just to make sure that if you're being offered something, it rings true, and if it doesn't ring true, maybe you want to ask your agent why.
Yeah. Oh, I'll just throw in one last thing, which I'll probably have to move around to another bit. But just as a cautionary thing for people listening, if someone comes to you and they want to buy your film rights, that's a red flag, and that's part of why I was putting so much stress on asking Nick to define options, because wanting to option your film is different from wanting to buy your film rights outright. And most of the people I've met who've been scammed by these kind of predatory companies, it's that someone comes in and literally takes their film rights away, and they don't ever get them back. And that's not the same as optioning it. It's really, really rubbish situation.
And you should also watch, so definitely that, and if anyone tries to take all your film rights, you should say no to them. And you should also watch specifically, and I think this is more common amongst slightly more predatory, smaller presses at times than it is amongst the big ones. You should watch for publishers that try and take your film rights too, and you should try and hold on to those, because they will try and sneak that into the contract that you're signing over all of your film rights to them as well, and then they'll shop it, and then they'll take a commission on it, when really you should hold on to those.
There's no benefit because publishers cannot make films, so they're just going to be an extra middleman taking even more of the money, which best case scenario you're getting 2% of like the whole thing, so it's already a low amount. And thank you so much again for all of that. Really useful information for hopefully our listeners, and definitely for people that we know, and hopefully for me. I'm not sure I can say that bit, but thank you again, and it's really good to meet you in person as well.
Yes, good to actually put faces to Twitter handles.
Yes.
Thanks so much,
cool.
Nick.
Amazing.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks, man.
Yeah, see you in a couple of weeks, Sonia. I'm excited.
You've been listening to the Publishing Radio Podcast with Sunny Dean and Scott Drakeford. Tune in next time for more in-depth discussion on everything publishing industry. See you later.